Cool. Well, thanks everybody for attending today. It means a lot that everybody's so interested in the topic. It's one of my favorite topics in the realm of astrology, so I'm excited to tell you all about it today. Like Denise said, I am a consulting astrologer. I'm based out of New Orleans, Louisiana, although I'm originally from the Midwest area. I know a lot of folks mentioned Ohio. I'm originally from Michigan and Illinois, so I know that snow and cold very well myself. So give me just one moment to pull up the presentation itself. While I'm doing that, just wanted to also refer to my bio for a moment, just to kind of give you a good idea of who I am. So like I said, I'm currently living in New Orleans, Louisiana. My practice these days is a lot of tarot reading, actually. I've been reading tarot longer than I have been doing astrology. It's about 10 plus years now that I've been tossing cards for folks. And I started studying astrology around 2017 was when I came around to it. And then I eventually did a certification course the first year with Nightlight Astrology, Adam Elenbaas's program. For those of you who might be familiar with him, he's got a pretty popular YouTube channel. And after I finished that program with him in 2021, I started doing formal consultation. So it's been about a year now. And in addition to doing all this fun stuff, right? All these divinatory arts. I'm also a drummer. I'm an ordained Dharma teacher at a temple that I used to attend quite frequently back in Michigan. I'm also a father. So I wanted to, open our time here together first by just acknowledging, let's see. Just by offering a land acknowledgement, because I know yesterday was Native American Heritage Day, and Thanksgiving as a holiday itself, I know brings up a lot of mixed feelings with all kinds of people, especially Indigenous folks. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the people of New Orleans, at least, the Chitimacha, Homa, and Choctaw people who primarily called this place, home before European colonizers came from France and Spain. I wanted to also let folks know I'm totally open to questions throughout the whole talk. If you want to say, something, you can raise your hand using the little chat feature in Zoom. You can also put something out into the dialogue box, the chat box. And if I miss either of those, would you let me know as well, Denise? Feel free to hop on the mic and let me know that people are curious to hear more about something. And I'm trying to see. Sorry, this is my first time using Canva on Zoom for presenting.
The screen was working before,
okay,
and then you brought it into a different view.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, in that case, I might not be able to view my notes at the same time as I present. All right, say lovey. All right, so, and then I also wanted to just offer a disclaimer before I begin as well. So, astrology, primarily we can think of it as falling into 4 different camps, right? Or 4 different, spheres of practice, with most of us doing natal astrology, kind of the study of birth charts of individuals. Then mundane astrology being the study of, astrological cycles and how those correspond to big events, how they affect nations, kind of the ebb and flow of history. We have horary astrology, when we can use a chart to determine the answer to a question, and then also electional astrology, using astrology to choose auspicious times to take a certain action. I will say that, primarily the planetary hours are used in the sphere of electional astrology, but they kind of bleed into the other domains as well, I would say. And then, along the lines of my disclaimer, one thing that it bleeds into pretty obviously, I'd say, is astrological magic. If you are, more in the materialist camp, or you're not interested in the spiritual aspect of astrology or the magical aspect of astrology, this might not necessarily be your cup of tea. So I just wanted to put that out there, that we are going to talk a little bit about magic and the occult today. And yeah, so I wanted to just kind of couch this on my own thoughts about cycles and time and what astrology even is. I primarily see astrology as a study of time, different ways of viewing, interpreting, and relating to time. And the planetary hours, in my opinion, are like the tiniest, most microscopic way we can look at and relate to time or interpret it, with the cycles of the outer planets like Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, giving us the largest, most macroscopic view. So let's zoom in today and talk a little bit about the planetary hours then. So what even are they, right? What are the planetary hours? This is a technique that we can pretty confidently date back to some time in, the either Sumeria or Babylon, the cultures of Mesopotamia, who gifted us with kind of the foundational techniques of astrology. It was later developed in Greece, and I actually recently learned, as I was putting this presentation together, there is some like academic quibbling whether the Greeks invented it or it really did come from Babylon. But we do have Vettius Valens, one of the kind of the foundational Hellenistic astrologers that a lot of people use today. He does have a passage about the planetary hours. So we do know it at least has about 2,000 years of history in the tradition. So the planetary hours, I think one of the reasons they're most interesting is because they form the basis of the planetary days. Most folks, it seems to me, are pretty familiar with the ideas that the days of the week are named after the gods and planets of the classical world. A lot of people may take this for granted, but it's pretty quick to observe, that, for instance, Sunday is the day of the sun. It is the sun's day. Monday is the moon's day. Today is Saturday, which is Saturn's day, right? It's not entirely clear, though, in English, because several of the days are named after the Germanic equivalents of Roman deities. So, for instance, Thursday or Thursdag is Thor's day, and Thor was is considered equivalent to Jupiter. Similarly, Tuesday is Tursdag or Tuesday, and Tur was a god of war, therefore associated with Mars, the Roman god of war. And in other languages, this relationship is a little bit more clear. So for instance, mardi in French or martes in Spanish are Mars Day, right? So there's something a little odd, though, about these days of the week, because they don't seem to follow a set order like the way we often order the planets. So the standard week follows Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Why don't the days of the week follow the order of the planets? That, it seems a little odd that it kind of jumps from one to the other. And that's because the planetary hours form the actual foundation of the planetary days. We'll get into how we calculate the planetary hours in a little bit, but I just want to kind of introduce the idea that running underneath the surface of the planetary days is another system, or a kind of an order of logic or a rationale that explains why each planet rules the day that it does. So the planetary hours themselves are arranged in something we call the Chaldean order, in which the planets are arranged in the relative speed from slowest to fastest. So the Chaldean order goes by a couple different names. It shows up, Chaldea is just a name used in the ancient world to refer to Babylon, the area of Mesopotamia. But it also shows up in Aristotle as something he calls the planetary spheres. And there's an image here on your screen of, Aristotle's conceptual model of the universe, how he really thought that everything kind of hung together. So it's a system of concentric spheres, kind of like a Russian nesting doll, with the Earth. It's a geocentric worldview. So the Earth sat at the center. Just outside of the Earth was the Moon, the planetary body closest to us. Beyond that is Mercury, followed by Venus and the Sun. Further out, we have Mars, then Jupiter, Saturn, and eventually the sphere of the fixed stars, the constellations who stay in place rather than move throughout the zodiac the way that the planets do. So most people would start with the slowest planet, Saturn, and then move to the quickest planet, which would be the Moon. So the order is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Notice this isn't the actual speed of each of the planets, but just the speed by which we relatively view them from a geocentric perspective. So as astrologers, we take stock of where the planets are on any given day. And in general, the Moon will fly through a sign in about 2.5 days, whereas Saturn takes up to 2.5 years to move through a sign, even 3 years. Is this all making sense so far? Please let me know if there's anything that's not adding up. Cool, thank you, Denise. All right, so how do we calculate the hours? So a planetary day, like a typical day of our 24-hour clock, has 24 hours. But rather than start at midnight, the way, Saturday will end tonight at 12 o'clock when Sunday will begin. Planetary days instead start at sunrise and then end at the following sunrise. They still have 24 hours. So those 24 hours are actually split in half, with 12 hours being given to the daytime and then 12 hours being given to the nighttime. So for daytime hours, we take the time between the sunrise and the sunset, then divide that chunk of time by 12. Conversely, for nighttime, we do the same method, but we take the time from sunset to the following sunrise and divide by 12. We then assign hours to planets, starting with the planet who gives the day its name. So for instance, today, the first hour will belong to Saturn, or did belong to Saturn. And stick with me, this makes a little bit more sense on the following page. So let's just take, for instance, today's the 26th of November, 2022, in New Orleans, Louisiana, right? Today, the sun rose at 6:35 a.m. It will set today at 5:01 p.m. So this gives us our chunk of time for the day. Once we divide it by 12, we have hour segments, or planetary hour segments, that are about 52 minutes long. If we do the same thing with the nighttime, we can start at sunset today, which will be 5:01 p.m., until the following sunrise, which will also be at 6:35. We have our chunk of time for the night. We divide that by 12, and then each hour is 67 minutes long. You notice that the hours are not, clean 60-minute intervals, right? And that is because the amount of daylight varies throughout the year, and also varies according to your latitude, like how far north or south you live. For instance, I can only imagine what calculating the hours would be like if you lived in Scandinavia during during summertime, when you have only 4 hours of nighttime at night, right? So the hours are always going to vary according to location and season, but they will be equal around the time of the equinox, around the time of the vernal equinox in spring and the autumnal equinox in the fall. So it's the only time you'll really ever have even hours. The rest of the year, it's kind of messy. But one thing I kind of like about this system is we have, it kind of shows how, the zodiac is kind of built on this interplay of light and dark, and we kind of have this daily slice or this daily vision of the kind of decrease of light during the dark half of the year from, September until March, and then vice versa during the spring and summer. So I used a website that I really enjoy called lunarium.co.uk to kind of show you what would the planetary hours look like for today in New Orleans. So if we start with the first hour being given to Saturn, starting at 6:34 this morning. When I looked it up, it said 6:35 according to the almanac. This website said 6:34, but I'm not going to quibble over 1 minute. But it gives us, the hour starts at 6:35 at sunrise, will run for its 52 minutes, then end at 7:26. At that point, the hour will then move down in, descending order of the, of the Chaldean order, and then pass to Jupiter. And Jupiter will have 52 minutes, followed by Mars, another 52 minutes, then the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. The system starts back up again at midday with Saturn, and then follows the same sequence once again. You'll notice that we essentially then have 3 sets of 7, 3 sets of hours in which we're able to go through the full Chaldean order, but it leaves us 3 leftover hours every night. So you'll have 4 hours belonging to the planet who rules the day, with Saturn having, 1 hour starting at 6:34 a.m., another hour starting at 12:39 p.m., another hour starting at 7:16 p.m., and then another very late at night at 3:11 a.m., right? If we then bounce forward, and just kind of carry out the rest, the remaining hours of the day, continuing in the Chaldean order, we have Saturn, then Jupiter, then Mars, and then following after that is, of course, the Sun, at which point the Sun will rise during Sun hour on Sun's day, right? So this calculation of, the 24 hours being given to each day, and the day being ruled by the planet who has the first hour of that day, is what gives us the structure of our week itself. Here's an illustration that kind of puts it all together. This is a heptagram, a 7-sided star. Sometimes this is called the Star of the Magi in magic circles. But if we take the planets and then, put them in a circle according to the Chaldean order, starting with, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. If we start with Saturn and then actually trace kind of the pattern created by the days of the week, it gives us this really lovely star figure. So we go from Saturn to the Sun, from the Sun to the Moon, from the Moon to Mars, from Mars to Mercury, Mercury to Jupiter, and then Jupiter to Venus over the course of, our week. And we get this really lovely heptagram figure. So in addition to ruling a day, there are also planets that rule a night. Each planet gets to rule 1 night each week. And the night belongs to whichever planet rules the hour after sunset. So for instance, on Sunday, the first hour after sunset is Jupiter's. For Monday, it's Venus. Tuesday, Saturn. Wednesday, the Sun. Thursday, the Moon. Friday, it's Mars. And Saturday is Mercury. And we can use these in a practical context, which we'll get to later on. But I think just in terms of, getting to know a planet's character, getting to know a planet's nature, what it likes, dislikes, how it gets on with other planets or how it relates to the other planets. I think there's actually kind of like a meditation waiting to be had here, or kind of like certain clues to be inferred from the fact that, for instance, Jupiter rules, the night on Sunday. What do Jupiter and the Sun have in common, or what can they agree on? Same goes for Saturn ruling Tuesday night. I think that's very appropriate because they're both malefics, right? Saturn rules the night during Mars day. So yeah, it's something to chew over maybe for the future. So how do we use these things? How do we use the planetary hours? So most of the time, it's like a rudimentary form of electional astrology. Denise gave us a really fantastic demonstration of kind of like electional astrology 101 several months back. But if you recall, electional astrology is essentially, using astrological timing and techniques to pick auspicious moments to do big things like found a business, get married. And we don't have to always chalk it up to, finding the time for these really big events like going on trips and adventures. You can also use it in a smaller scale as well. And I think that's how the planetary hours can be used. So we can choose to take a significant action during the relevant hour on a relevant day. And I think of it as almost like a rudimentary way of getting into electional astrology, just like one technique to start with, to start playing with experiencing, interpreting, and relating to time on the level of astrology or with an astrological vocabulary. So for instance, we could meet with a figure of authority on a sun hour on Sunday, right? The website that I mentioned before, Lunarium, has a really fantastic feature where he'll give you kind of keywords and also recommended activities for things that you can do during the planetary hour. So for Venus, I think he suggests, like, if you're a creative person at Venus hour on Venus day, take some time to write a poem, work on the painting that you've been, chipping away at, write your screenplay. For Mercury, use it to schedule an important phone call, send an important email. We might want to take other factors into consideration later on, for instance, where the moon is, what sign that planet is currently in, and whether it's a sign of dignity or debility. But just to start out, I think if you're interested in electional astrology, the planetary hours give you a way to kind of feel your way into that world. Similarly, in horary astrology, William Lilly also mentions in Christian Astrology, his textbook, a technique in which he only considers a question fit to be judged if the ruler of the hour, so let's say you throw up a chart, we look at what the rising sign of the chart is and what planet rules that rising sign. That would be the ruler of the hour. My apologies. The ruler of the hour would be the planet who rules that hour, obviously. But the ascendant ruler would be, whoever rules the ascendant in that given chart. He would only consider a question fit to be judged if those planets were the same planet, of the same nature, or of the same triplicity. So that's how we see it appearing in horary astrology. And then also, like I said at the start, we use planetary hours in astrological magic, similar to the way I described in electional astrology, in which we choose to take a significant action, like create a talisman for a corresponding planet on their day and during their hour. One really good resource for this is the work of Christopher Warnock at renaissanceastrology.com. But he, for instance, suggests creating a Venus talisman during the first hour of Venus on Venus Day. So it'd be, right at sunrise on a Friday. And then lastly, I also have this book called The Modern Witchcraft Guide to Magical Herbs. There's a fun sidebar bit that they offer about Thomas Culpeper, who is a famous 16th century English herbalist who wrote about planetary correspondences to the planets, or to herbs, in his work. And one thing he suggests is picking herbs in a planetary hour for the planet who rules them. So, for instance, thank you for your patience. For instance, the sun rules mistletoe and chamomile, right? So he suggests picking chamomile during an hour of the sun on a Sunday, right? And I think these kind of levels of correspondences leaning into, a world in which different plants kind of bear the signatures of the planets themselves is a way into like another way of viewing the world and relating to time. And along the lines of kind of astrological magic, I guess what I want to say is my entry point into using the planetary hours themselves was through magic. You can't really get around the use of astrology in what we would call like the Western magical tradition. And at this point, I think I'm going to stop sharing and just bounce to the Zoom window. In preparing for this, I unfortunately ran out of time and unfortunately ran out of, slides to fill up the screen. But I just wanted to share like my own story with using the planetary hours. So I first came across them through a book called The Magical Treatise of Solomon, or the Hygromantia. It's a collection of texts dating back to the Byzantine period that were compiled and seemed to form a core text that floated around through a lot of monasteries and in a sort of clerical underground. It eventually became influential in the creation of grimoires during the Renaissance and Enlightenment period in Europe. And it suggests kind of a system of astrological magic using the days of the moon, with there being specific auspicious actions related to each day as the moon moves through her 29-day cycle, as well as there being significant actions that one can take during a given hour of a given day. There are also then, and along those lines of those actions, they always fit the character of the planet and the who rules the day and the planet who rules the hour in question. So for instance, I know there's 1 hour on Wednesday. It's a Saturn hour on a Wednesday that is good for opening locks or breaking open things, right? If we think about Mercury as being the kind of keeper of keys, one who travels, has associations with thieves and lockpicks, pickpockets, right? And Saturn being, a wall, a barrier, a limit of some kind, Mercury offers the ability during that Saturn hour of his day to create a talisman that can break open a lock or break open a door, open new doorways or new possibilities, right? So the way I started was just taking the prayers that are provided in this text and then saying them during the first hour of the planetary day. So for instance, today, during the first hour of Saturn, on Saturn day, I said a prayer of Saturn, which I will share with you now. Okay. So it goes like this. And to be fair, this does come out of a medieval European context. So it has some very Judeo-Christian overtones, but beneath the surface, I believe there's a real animistic bent. So it says, Lord our God, the great and supreme, who created and fashioned man, the abyss saw you and feared. The living saw you and became lifeless. In his name and by his great and mighty power, I conjure you, Saturn. By the height of heaven and by the depth of the sea, I conjure you, Saturn, do not disobey me. By your antiquity and by your preeminence, I conjure you, O cold Saturn, who has authority over every harm, who gives treasures and who offers everything. I conjure you again, O Saturn, in your following names. And they all conclude this way, where you have a series of what are called barbarous names at the end, which usually one says kind of in a loud, bellowing voice, yelling at your candles or what have you, usually with some incense lit as well. But one thing I found really fascinating about once I started to use the planetary prayers during specific planetary hours in this kind of devotional context of, saying to each planet on their day, giving them a greeting and then asking them to kind of grant me good fortune on their day. It ended up kind of conjuring a series of synchronicities in my life. So for instance, at the time I was living in Spain actually, and I was an au pair to a family of kiddos, kind of ranging from 9 to 16. One of them went on a field trip to the Prado. It's this famous museum in Madrid that's got, works from all these famous European masters. And if anybody here has ever seen the painting by Francisco Goya of Saturn eating his children, there's the image of kind of like Saturn taking a bite out of one of his kids. And it was funny, earlier during that week, my, the child who was watching, who was taken care of, went on this field trip. And then I asked him about it later on Saturday. And of all the paintings that he wanted to tell me very excitedly about on that Saturday that, made the big impression on him was the painting of Saturn, right? And you kind of notice if you start doing this yourself, you saying, the prayers, inviting the planets into your life, there's a way to start, seeing their influence in very subtle ways on a day-to-day basis. For instance, saying the prayer of Mercury, when you start your Wednesday, and then noticing maybe how you kind of gracefully glide through your morning commute. Hopefully having greased the palm of the planet of commerce, trade, and transportation, right? So I'm going to then move here to kind of some suggestions for getting started. So if you're interested in this yourself. So you need a reliable calculator to figure out the planetary hours themselves. My favorite is lunarium.co.uk. He has some fantastic articles on there as well about, how to calculate the planetary hours hand if you like. I guess that's one thing I failed to mention as well, is that back in the day, before we had computers and lovely calculators and apps, you actually had to take out your newspaper, look at the sunrise and sunset time of the day, and do it by hand. I've done it a couple times. I mean, if you know kind of elementary math, you can do it, but it's definitely more convenient to just look at an app on your phone or pull it up on a website. There's also planetaryhours.net, which doesn't have any kind of fancy articles, but it has like a really just kind of straightforward presentation of them. And then there's also an app called just Planetary Hours, which is handy. They will also kind of give you suggestions or keywords for each hour of the day. They will bug you all the time, though, to pay to remove ads from the app, though. So just take that for what it's worth. It used to do something as well, the app, where it would notify you when, like with a push notification, when the hours would change. Mine has stopped doing that. I don't know if I'm behind on an update, but that is a possibility as well, as having, maybe my phone's just too old to run the latest version, but being able to see kind of when the hour changes each day, I think is helpful. And I would suggest, beginning as well, by just, before even going into a devotional context or trying to use it in electional astrology or trying to even use it in horary, just observe the flow of your day and see how they correspond to the planetary hours. Did you end up eating during a moon hour and talking with a friend during Mercury hour? Did you have that meeting with your boss during Jupiter or Sun hour? Did you receive a little bit of money during the Jupiter or Venus hour? You know what I mean? Did you, I don't know, there's all kinds of different ways they can manifest. I find that it usually lines up about, 60, maybe 75% of the time, like my experience of the day to day and how those hours, align with them and what I do. Later on, you can intentionally kind of schedule your day in a very Virgoan way according to those hours. But I think just taking some time to observe what happens in those planetary hours can kind of clue you in to the nature of the planets themselves too. And then if you are interested in kind of taking it in a devotional direction, find prayers or hymns that resonate with you. Like I said, I really enjoy the Hygromantia. Its prayers, though, are very Judeo-Christian. You can find some other similar ones throughout kind of the grimoire tradition, like the Grimoire Verum. But you can also use the Orphic hymns. I'm a big fan of the Orphic hymns. There's 2 or 3 translations of them out there. Reciting the Orphic hymns, which kind of cut straight to kind of the Greek or Roman characters in question. You also have, at one point, I took all the kind of planetary correspondences, to bring this back to the beginning, where Germanic deities or Germanic gods or Norse gods, right, are said to be equivalent to some of the Roman and Greek gods. I went through and I made prayers for each one of those deities. So for instance, Froya on Friday, Ymir on Saturday, Suna for Sunday, and so on. If you're all interested in like Nordic spirituality or Germanic spirituality, I'd be happy to share those prayers as well. Or write your own, feel out the planets and how they manifest in your own life and kind of write your own prayers, petitions, or poems for them. And I think I see a question in the chat. Planetaro is an app that doesn't bug you with ads. That's good to know. I haven't heard of that one yet, so that's good to know. I have a friend who's working on code for a Google Calendar that you could add as a layer to your pre-existing Google Calendar that would give you a notification each time the hours change, but he still hasn't figured out a good way to make it specific to your location and vary according to location. So I'm hoping he finishes that soon so that I can start using that instead. But we've kind of reached the end of what I had prepared for the day. So I'm really open at this point to questions, comments, consternations, snide remarks, or jokes at this point.
Great job. Great introduction. I have also played around with using planetary hours for devotion. And I learned some things from you today, but one of the things that I learned, I don't know if you'd heard, is when I was a kid and I went to camp, we always had like an evening kind of song service called Vespers. And I learned more recently that Vespers was really what I believe the Romans used as a devotional service on each planetary day, not in the sunrise hour, but the very first hour after that belonged to that planet. So like with your example of Saturn, it would be like the noon hour, the 12:19 hour of Saturn. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yes, totally. I heard of that, and I know that's like a deeper dive, right? The way that what the Roman Catholic kind of liturgical calendar schedules a lot of things according to these either the seasons, like the zodiacal seasons, or according to planetary hours. But I didn't know that bit about Vespers. That's really cool.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. And then somehow it got co-opted to like an evening song service for camp. I don't know.
Funny thing how things kind of mutate and shift and change as they tumble down through history.
Anyone else have questions or experiences you want to share about using planetary hours? It's a quiet room today. Well, thank you, Caleb, for the presentation. Is there anything else you'd like to add to kind of wind us up?
I mean, I guess I was I just want to say that I see this as, an area where the possibilities are endless. If you want to go, like I said, super Virgo about the way you plan your week using the planetary hours, you can do that. Like for a while, I was like, I'm only going to work out during Mars hours, on like Mars Day, Thursday, and Saturday. Oh, one bit I wanted to add about the devotional context is that oftentimes devotional practices are used in what we call planetary remediation. So kind of the idea that if either a planet is severely afflicted in your chart or a planet is kind of your time lord based on whatever system you're using for that year, that one can submit offerings and prayers during the relevant hour to kind of hopefully smooth things over with that planet. So I just wanted to offer as an example, like I just started a 6th house profection year. My 6th house is ruled by Jupiter. So since that started, I've been doing planetary remediation during the 3rd hour of Jupiter on Jupiter's day, or no, not the 3rd, that would be way too late at night, the 2nd, on Jupiter's day, ever since that started, using also materia from Sphere and Sundry. If anybody's not familiar, they're a organization company. It's just Kate and company, right? But they create talismanic materia of the planets that you can use kind of a magical or devotional context. So I use a little bit of Jupiter materia, I light a candle, I say a prayer, light some incense, and hope that the greater benefic smiles upon me this year, you know?
I actually did something similar. There was a time when Mars was giving me some grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so I forget if it's a period of 5 or 6, I think it's 5, Mars's number's 5. So 5 weeks in a row on Mars Day during Mars Hour, I made a donation to an organization that provides service dogs for disabled soldiers.
That's wonderful. You really did like double down on the Mars associations there with both dogs and soldiers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And that's a deeper dive and a longer rabbit hole is planetary remediation itself. But that planetary charity is a great point to add. Because the hours are also going to inform when you're going to enact that charity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. Had to set the alarm every week to get up and get money.
I am really curious if this added up, if there's anybody who's confused or scratching their head, or whether this really all, I guess, hung together. Not that I'm looking for confirmation, but more for like a sense of like improvement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I saw we had somebody flashed a heart earlier, so thank you. Thank you, Zoom user. If anybody else has feedback for Caleb, who's relatively new to teaching astrology topics, but I think he's doing a great job. It's hard for me to judge because I was, it's like I've used planetary hours. So if you're a novice, I don't know if that, too fast. Deborah says your speaking style's easy to follow, Caleb.
Cool. Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah, I think you're, just lacking confidence. I think you got it.
Thanks. I mean, that I just ultimately went into this with a lot of nervous energy and lots of notes, but was unable to view those while giving the presentation. So I'm just hoping that everything I wanted to communicate actually came across and I remembered them all. So thanks for the positive feedback, guys.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I don't know there's a question from Los. Have you looked into Eastern mysticism, Caleb?
Yes, I am a practitioner of what I call Buddha Dharma or Buddhism, right? I have taken my bodhisattva vows as well as received the precepts and from a temple that kind of descends from a branch of Korean Zen. And I also have received a couple Vajrayana practices, Tibetan Buddhist practices that I engage as well. And Taoism is kind of like a sidebar study of mine that interests me a lot.
Thanks.
There's kind of a separate discipline, right? You would say of planetary remediation in Jyotish, or what is commonly called Vedic astrology. But I do not claim to know very much at all whatsoever about that. That is its own topic with kind of a wealth of information within.
Our particular meetup group is kind of welcoming to anyone who practices astrology in any form. My background is, Western tropical. Caleb's done a lot of study with Hellenistic. So, but, we certainly, welcome presentations or, sharing from anyone with any sort of astrological background. We, always want to learn more from each other. So.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. I will load this into YouTube after doing a little editing, and then I'll share the link. So like I said, you can revisit it or share it as you wish. Not sure right now of our next date, but it will be on Meetup when we decide to meet again, either in person or on Zoom. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers. Have a good weekend, everybody.